moved around a lot. This time, George had promised himself that he was turning over a new leaf. No more pranks, no more class clown. He wasn't going to get into any trouble anymore, like he had at all his old schools. At first, it really worked. George raised his hand before answering questions. He didn't make faces or laugh behind teachers' backs. But George didn't have to be a math whiz like his pal Alex to figure out how many friends being a new, well-behaved kid would get him. The answer was easy. 0, nada, zilch. That night, George's parents took him out to Ernie's Ice Cream Emporium. While they were sitting outside and George was finishing his root beer float, a shooting star flashed across the sky. So George made a wish. I want to make kids laugh, but not get into trouble. Unfortunately, the star was gone before George could finish the wish, so only half came true. The first half. A minute later, George had a funny feeling in his belly. It was like there were hundreds of tiny bubbles bouncing around in there. The bubbles ping-ponged their way into his chest and bing-bonged their way up into his throat. And then... George let out a big burp. A huge burp. A super burp. The super burp was loud, and it was magical. Suddenly, George lost control of his arms and legs. It was like they had minds of their own. His hands grabbed straws and stuck them up his nose like a walrus. His feet jumped up on the table and started dancing. Everyone at Ernie's started laughing, except George's parents, who were covered in ice cream from the sundaes he had knocked over. That wasn't the only time the super burp had burst its way out of George's belly. George never knew when a burp would strike, or what it would make him do. Like juggle raw eggs in his classroom, which would have been fine if George actually knew how to juggle, or make his model volcano erupt in red goo all over his teacher, or dive bomb the audience during a talent show. Every time the burp came, George made the other kids laugh, but he also managed to make grown-ups really mad. That was why George was determined to keep this burp from bursting out. He didn't know what he might do if it exploded out of him. But he did know where he would wind up. In trouble. And in the principal's office. So George kept spinning and spinning, trying to force that burp down the drain. Whoosh. Suddenly George felt a huge bubble pop inside his stomach. All the air rushed right out of him. The fizzy feeling was gone. All right. George had beaten the burp. He stopped spinning and pumped his fist in the air. What was that all about? Louis asked. George had to say something, fast. It's your fault, George told Louis. You were making me spin. Huh? Louis asked. It's that remote control, George said. It's sending signals to the metal fillings in my tooth. It's making me spin, see? The kids all started laughing. Hey, it's making me spin too, Chris added. He began whirling around and around. A minute later, all the kids were spinning in circles. Well, almost all of them anyway. Max and Mike stopped spinning after Louis shot them dirty looks. You are so weird, Louis told George. George shrugged. He didn't mind Louis calling him weird. It was better than Louis calling him crazy. And crazy was definitely what Louis would think if George ever told him about the super burp.